Hey there, this is Renessa Boley Layne, and welcome to another conversation on creating your perfect work. If you follow me, then you know it is my life's mission to equip you to discover, design, and get highly paid to do work you love, whether that means radically changing careers, launching your business, or bringing a big idea to life. So today I am super duper 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 excited because we are going to be talking about the right way to orchestrate your pay raise. And here's why we're having this conversation today. So obviously, one way to get highly paid doing work you love is to ask for the money. And not just ask for the money, but get good at asking for the money. And the challenge is that there's so much more to orchestrating your pay raise than just asking for the money. Like the ask is a bit of it, but there's so much more to it. And that's why we're talking about orchestrating. And our guest today is really going to lay it out step by step by step. And I firmly believe that there are going to be some things that you walk away with and you're going to be like, I did not know, but you needed to know. And now you're going to know. So this dynamic woman that is sharing the screen with me is Romy Newman. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about who she is. And then I'm going to tell you what I really think. So Romy is the president and co-founder of Fairygodboss. And it's a business with a mission to improve the workplace for women everywhere. And before venturing into the crazy world of entrepreneurship, Romy ran a digital advertising sales and operations organization with the Wall Street Journal. And she also worked in marketing at Google and Estee Lauder. Romy is a frequent speaker at venues like Grace Hopper, the Pennsylvania Conference for Women. She's been a contributor to Fortune, to Huffington Post, and Inc. And so she knows her stuff. She's earned her chops. She's definitely somebody that we need to listen to. And those are the credentials. But here's why I'm super excited to have Romy in this conversation. First, if you are a career woman, no matter what stage you're in, you need to know about Fairygodboss. And part of the purpose of this series was part of my intentions around this series was to introduce you to thought leaders and organizations and resources that you need to know. And Fairygodboss is one of those. You need to be subscribed to their site. Their content is stellar. There's not a day that goes by that I don't find something interesting or compelling, actionable. And I believe that it can really impact your success. So that's the reason why I'm super excited about having her here. Second reason is that Romy just loves what she does and her energy just shines right through. And you're going to see that in this conversation as well. And I told her before we actually started our conversation, I wanted to bottle up her energy and sell it. So you're going to be blessed by her, and I'm really excited to have her. And so with that, I want to officially welcome you and thank you for sharing this time with us.
Renessa, thank you for having us. And it means the world to me that you like Fairygodboss so much. We're really, our goal is to unite women around helping each other advance in the workplace, achieve joy in the workplace, get paid in the workplace. So really glad to be able to be part of this with you.
Absolutely. So, first of all, obviously this interview series is around creating your perfect work, and not to be confused with perfection. Perfect work is the career or business that you know that you were meant to do. It's the cause that you're meant to champion. It's the people that you're meant to support. It's the contribution that you know that you were designed to make in the marketplace.
I love that. And I do want to say that, one of the things I've been talking to people about lately is when you talk about self-care, we all should be practicing self-care and taking breaks and taking care of ourselves. But part of self-care is doing work you love, finding work you love and loving it.
I agree
so
with
it's so important to do that as well.
No, I agree with it. I totally agree with it. And so the question that I have for you, you've had a storied career, you've done lots of different things. How do you know that the work that you're doing now with Fairygodboss is aligned to your perfect work, even as that continues to evolve?
How do I personally know? I know because I love it. I mean, I'm so engaged. I'm so pleased to be part of a company that is so mission driven, that is so oriented toward helping advance women and helping women help each other. I'm also, though, I love the work of getting to manage my own company. And one of the things I laugh about is that, as you know, I was in a corporate role for a long time. And one of the critical pieces of feedback I would often get in my reviews was, Romy, stay in your lane. Like I was trying to do everybody's job and they would, Romy, stay in your lane.
Yeah.
And now I get to swim the whole pool.
Oh, look at that. Look at that.
And I love it. And it thrills me and it's exciting and it's new challenges every day.
Yeah.
Starting my own company has been the most exhilarating thing I've ever done professionally. No question.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's not old. I've been doing it for over 5 years and it's not old.
No, that's awesome. It's funny because I think something that people may have missed even in what you just shared, sometimes the feedback that you get from folks, even if it's not the most positive feedback, is indicative of what right direction might be for you. And so this whole idea of staying in your own lane, it was like, man, I keep swerving over here and swerving over there. And the temptation might be, let me rein myself in and stay in my own lane, when in actuality, you're supposed to be all over the place, doing this and doing that and adding value in so many big ways. And so as people try to figure out what perfect work looks like for them, pay attention to what the market has told you, whether the market is a manager, a boss, or, colleagues and feedback, and figure out some of that stuff that you might be bumping your head against, because it's not always a stop sign to who you're supposed to be. Sometimes it's directional in terms of, man, what does my next look like? And perhaps I should be freeing myself up to do something a little bit different. And so I definitely want folks to take note of that. But tell us your story, because I'm always curious how people migrate to where they are. And you started, in the corporate space, obviously doing advertising and some other things, but how did you end up starting this incredible site and doing the work that you do now?
So what's interesting, I will say, I had a working mother who was such a role model for me. And she was a salesperson and she sold insurance and she worked on 100% commission. And I was very, very aware of it growing up. And we would spend nights as a family around the kitchen table, figuring out how she would win the next piece of business all together. It was a family affair. But I thought, I don't want to go into insurance. My mother is in insurance. So I went into cosmetics, which I think is the exact opposite.
Yeah, couldn't be.
But what I found, I started in marketing and I loved working in marketing, and Estee Lauder was an incredible place to work, a place that really took a lot of stock in fostering and training employees. Yeah. But the more that I was there, the more that I was drawn to revenue and sales. I just realized, I guess it's in my blood. So I kept, for some time, it took me a while, not having started my career in sales. It really actually took me like 5 years to pivot to sales, and it was not easy. But I ended up going from a finance strategy role at the Wall Street Journal into sales, and loving it. And then I found that I had a real talent for understanding how to monetize, how to drive revenue, how to create a value proposition to a buyer. And so I've been able to pivot that into my career. And as I mentioned, I had my 2 children. I was working at the Journal. I felt like a little stuck professionally. And then I also felt like things were complicated personally. I was willing to work as much as I could, but I also had certain hours that I wanted to be with my children. And so, for example, it was really hard for me to get to the office by 8:30 if that was required. 9 was fine. But so I just found ultimately my corporate situation wasn't working for me professionally or personally. And then in just kind of one of those moments of fate, my co-founder, Georgine, connected with me and said, I have this idea for a business. Would you be interested? I need someone to help monetize it. Would you be interested? And I thought, I'm a huge believer in just when an opportunity presents itself, you have to take advantage. And so I jumped into it.
Wow. I wasn't even going to go here, but I think I want to go here because the whole conversational series is around redesigning your success. And you were able to look at your circumstances and see what wasn't working for you. And there's a lot of women that are listening in, they're looking at their circumstances and there are things that aren't working for them either personally or professionally. And the temptation is just to kind of suck it up, as opposed to recognizing they don't necessarily have to change. Your organization may never change. but giving yourself permission and license and having the courage to do that. And so, and it could just be your makeup. You might just be a lot less risk averse, but how did you kind of even think through? It's a big deal to shift from the stability of a career and someone comes at you with this idea and you're like, sure. Like, what were the things that you considered in your head? What was the ultimate tipping point for you to say, let me go for it? Because there was no guarantee that 5 years later you guys would still be in business and growing and thriving. So how did you rationalize and make that decision to take the leap?
I'm so glad you asked that, because it took me a year. It took a full year from the first germ of the thought that was like, I think I should look for something else. I think that my time, I'd been at the Journal 7 years. I was thriving. I feel like I had my soul was very connected. My identity was really connected to the work I was doing there. But I think that feeling, you're getting my kids in the background. Sorry about that, everyone. But that is, I think, life in COVID age.
That is.
So anyway, it was my husband. I can't take credit. He finally said, "You've been talking about this for a year, just go for it."
Wow.
And that support made a big difference. But I would agree with you that don't wait a year to your audience. I'm going to tell your audience, don't wait a year. It's so easy to fear change, and it's so easy to be kind of saddled with inertia. But you should find joy in the work that you're doing. You should feel elevated by the work that you're doing. And there is, even now, there's so much more mobility than you know. Mm-hmm. Whether you're actually moving jobs or whether you're just having networking conversations or exploring, I so strongly recommend that you think about remaining mobile and looking at your options, because if you're not elated by the work you're doing, you can't be doing your best work.
Wow. That's a tweetable moment, y'all. That's a tweetable comment. If you're not elated by the work you're doing, you can't be doing your best work.
Right. And you want to do your best work, and and it's not a fit for your employer. Go where it's a great fit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I think that's awesome. And I think that a key takeaway is open yourself up to the exploration. Just because you say yes to the possibility, that doesn't mean you have to leave. That doesn't mean you have to turn in your 2 weeks notice. That doesn't mean that you have to go and hang out your shingle. What it does mean is that you're open. You're open to expansion. You're open to ideas. You're open to considering something that might be totally outside of the box. And once you make a quality decision that you're open, it's amazing what shows up for you that would never have shown up otherwise.
I call it window shopping.
Oh, I like it. I like it. I'm stealing that one. I'll give you credit for it, but I'm stealing that one. I like it. I like that a lot. So let's talk about the raise and the money, because that's what we came into this conversation for. I read an article that you wrote a couple years back about asking for the raise. And you shared in that article a story about a former employee who came to you and handled the discussion about his raise all sorts of wrong. And so I'd love for you to recount that situation for our audience, and then we're going to unpack it with all of the gems that they can take away from it to really be able to, to do it so much better than he did.
So just a little context is, I think moving into sales and the fact that I work in sales now makes me think differently about anything that you ask for. Mm-hmm. And so my advice to the world is you should think about asking for a raise as though you're making a sale. Mm-hmm. So that's caveat number one. And caveat number two is that what I think most people don't realize or appreciate until you've been a manager mm-hmm. is how hard it is to ask for a raise. Even if you as a manager want to get how hard it is for a manager to ask for a raise on behalf of an employee.
Okay, so yes.
If I have an employee who I in many times in my corporate job had employees that I really wanted them to get raises, but it was very hard for me to get one for them. Mm-hmm. And whenever I did, I was having to expend a great deal of political capital. I really had to go out on a limb, and I really had to fight for the money. So the story goes like this. First of all, no one should ever ask me for anything when I haven't had lunch and it's like 12:30. Start there. But it was sort of like I was hungry. It was the end of a day. It was the bad timing. And an employee came in and he said, "Oh, by the way, it's been 2 years and I really need a raise." And I thought, like, I just unloaded because I was like, what am I going to do with that right now? No. I can't help you with that right now. And why are you asking me for this? And also, what's the business case?
Yeah.
So my advice to everyone who's thinking about asking for a raise is you have to, number one, make a business case. You're asking your company to make a strategic investment in you. So what's the reason for it? Mm-hmm. Number two, you have to consider the time and the kind of context in which you're asking for the raise. Mm-hmm. Number three, you have to be prepared to hear no. Mm-hmm. Your boss is probably going to say no. Mm-hmm. You have to help your boss make the case. You have to help your boss want to make the case. Mm-hmm. What's in it for your boss? Why should they go put themselves on a limb for you? Mm-hmm. And then I think the last thing is you should say it should be collaborative, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of like, I need a raise, it's, I've worked for 2 years, I've achieved A, B, and C, mm-hmm. and I believe I have much more to give. Mm-hmm. I'm really interested in getting a raise. Can we work together to make a case for me to get a raise to management? Yeah. How can we do this over 3 months? Yeah. Because I think there's this expectation that like somebody could turn it right around, and in the large corporation, that's very difficult. Yeah. Oh, and the one other point that I always make is that always important also to understand and recognize the greater business context and the business cycle. Yeah. Like often companies plan on fiscal year budgets. So if you're mid-year, it's hard to just say, okay, well, I'm going to get a raise today. When does your company award raises, and under what parameters? Yeah,
this is great because what I love about what you said is that you've laid out kind of a framework, and I want to go back through each of these steps and kind of unpack them a little bit, because I think for some people this is the first time that they may be hearing about the raise from the perspective of the manager, from the perspective of the business. Because a lot of times we're looking at it from our perspective, what we know we've done, what we think we've done, what we think we deserve, and all those things may very well be true
and important.
Important. But what's even more important is the perception of the person on the other side. Because I can be right and I can be all of these things, but if I've now created an ultimatum, if I've pissed you off, if I have not considered you, then I've created a perception that may not get me what I want, and therefore doesn't get us where we need to go. So I'd love to unpack each one of those a little bit. What I find interesting though is even though your former employee bungled it, he did ask. Like he did have the cojones to say, like, here's what I want, and broach the conversation and whatnot. What do you notice, either from your research, from your experience as a manager, from the work that you do with Fairygodboss now? What do you notice about women in particular when it comes to the raise? Are we asking enough? Are we not? Like, what's happening especially as we start to talk about gender parity and pay parity and all that kind of stuff?
Right. 100% women do not ask enough. Sally Krawcheck famously wrote in her book, I loved this. She said the entire time she was running this huge organization, she said the men would wear out the carpet in the hallway in front of her office coming in to ask for raises. And not once did a woman ask her. I think, and as a woman, I've been so afraid of hearing no. Yeah. Like I thought if I asked for a raise and I heard no, it was the end of the world. Mm-hmm. It was that I was so afraid of that no. And actually that no, my favorite boss who trained me in sales said every sale starts with no. Mm. So you asking for the raise and hearing no is just the first, that's just the first inning of this 9-inning
You're
discussion.
In the game. You're just in the game.
Yeah, everybody should expect to start with that. Mm-hmm. Because any boss who's managing a tight budget is going to start with no, because one of the things they're checking is how determined are you?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. You share that one of the essential rules for asking for a raise is that it's not only about you.
Right.
And you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I really want to drill that point home because I think once women get the courage and they muster up the courage to ask,
It
the
feels
mistake is that you go in and you make it all about you.
Yeah.
How give us the context on how we should really think about this so that we go into those conversations seeing that boss, that manager, whether he or she's male or female, as another human being with priorities of their own, right?
Right.
So how do we
Right.
reframe that?
Yeah. So I think this is the really important thing to understand is that when you're asking your boss for a raise, implicitly you're asking your boss to go to bat for you.
Okay.
And why will your boss want to go to bat for you? It is hard. It's really hard to ask as a corporate manager for a raise for someone.
Mm-hmm.
So your manager has to want to do it because you're in concert.
Mm-hmm.
You've been helping your manager. You're helping your manager do better work. You're helping your manager get work accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
All those things are important. And also you want to have the case for it ready made and ready to be presented. So you don't want your manager to have to put together the 5 points that Renessa should get a raise.
Yeah.
You want to go to your manager and clearly document, these are the key reasons this investment in me is worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making this easy for you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help me get this raise? Or can you give me advice on how do you recommend I approach getting a raise? What can I do to help you advocate for me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I, as a parent, have been trained in collaborative problem solving.
There we go.
But I think it's much the same, right? It's like, how can we do this together instead of me being adversarial toward you in this context?
Got it. So as people are thinking about pulling together their business case, like break it down for them. What things should they be pulling together in their arsenal that becomes of value? Because just because you want the raise doesn't mean that's not a point of value. Just because you've got to pay your mortgage or cost of living is high in whatever your city is, yes, that's not a point of value. So what are actual points of value that women can leverage when they're building the case for why they should be considered for a raise?
Right. Very important. So your business is the business you work for is a business, right? And any dollar they invest, whether it's in a raise for you, whether it's in an office, whether it's in marketing, that dollar, somebody should be tracking what the return on investment in that dollar is, right? And so you have to help someone believe that that dollar is better invested in you. So I would start with capturing, recapping the things that you've accomplished in terms of value. Mm-hmm. So I do a lot of work advising people on resumes. It's the same idea. Mm-hmm. What are the data-driven, quantitative numbers? What did I contribute to this business in the last 12 months? Mm-hmm. And also, I think this is something that gets missed too, is what will I contribute in the next 12 months?
Got it.
What, because that is wonderful and you should definitely be rewarded for your work. But unfortunately, that's just kind of water under the bridge. Yeah. So that should be cited as kind of evidence of what you can achieve, but you should be going in helping the manager and the manager's managers understand what you're going to bring in the next 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really solid point, because for a couple reasons. A, I think it's compelling, but B, it allows your boss and your boss's boss and whoever else has to, play a role in that decision. It demonstrates that you are committed to the business. It demonstrates that you're committed to the direction that company or that department or whatever is going. And
playing the same team.
Yeah, you begin to be seen as someone who thinks beyond your individual role or your individual task or your individual responsibility, and really has some foresight. And because in doing that, you might be pulling ideas to the table that had not been considered, right? Innovations or ideas or all of that might not even exist, right? And so there's some value in being able to position yourself as a contributor for the long haul in doing so. So I think that's actually super compelling. you talk about, let's get more practical in terms of the when and the how and the all of that, because timing becomes really important. And you shared earlier on around budget cycles and those kinds of things, but how do you think about the right time to be able to have that kind of conversation?
Yeah. So I think that you should give your manager a heads up that this is important to you. So if you have a weekly one-on-one, this would be a time to say, um, you know, it's been 2 years since I've had a raise. I'm really interested in helping you make the case for me to get a raise. I'll schedule some time on your calendar so we can discuss it. Does that work? So it's not, nobody's getting blindsided. Nobody's, they can be prepared, and they know that you're coming to them as a collaborator, not as an adversary.
Yeah. There's a couple things I really like about that. One, and so those, for those of you who are listening, this is a great way to pause, rewind, and like pay attention to the scripting, because I think there's some really great scripting in here. One, you make it very, very clear. I'm interested in helping you make the case. It's this understanding that the buck doesn't always just stop with them. And I think sometimes we take this flaming bag of doo-doo and we put it on somebody else's desk, and we're like, now what you gonna do with that? Like, how are you gonna figure this out? But you've taken that in your language and made it very, very collaborative. The other thing I heard, and I don't know if that was your intent or not, you can tell me, but you almost assumed the close. It didn't come across like you were asking permission.
No, the presumptive sale, always.
It was very much a presumptive sale. And I think that for a lot of women listening in, the temptation is to go in and ask permission to have the raise conversation. And then you set yourself up to get shut down immediately because you asked for permission. Now that thing is dead in the water. But here, and again, rewind, y'all, and hear exactly how she said it. There was this presumption that, oh, we're having this conversation. And so here's how I'm going to ensure I'll get some time on our calendar, blah, blah, blah. I'll come prepared, whatever. But there is this presumption that the conversation is going forward and it's not asking for permission. And I think that's a very subtle but important difference.
Exactly. And then to go one step ahead, I still expect in that first conversation that your manager might say no. And when he or she does, say, okay, then I'll plan to check back in about 8 weeks. And then 8 weeks later, you're back in with the same conversation. And you just have to keep at it. If you keep at it, it will happen. Because it's easier to say no when it feels like if you hear no, you're going to stop asking.
Yeah, but I think for anyone listening in, because there are men listening in as well, but anyone listening in that has kids, you know that's kind of how it goes. Like, they come in with their request. It doesn't matter what, my daughter is 2 and change. Romy's kids are 6 and 8. It just happens at different levels of sophistication. But that first question, can I get goldfish? No. Okay, goldfish? No. Goldfish? No. By 16th goldfish, you're getting the thing, a goldfish. Just either I'm worn out, I'm tired, or it's going to make everybody's, life easier if you just kind of get what you want in this particular situation. But for adults, that's a much harder perspective to take, because I don't think kids take the no personally. Like, I don't think they feel any kind of way about it. They don't feel unloved. They don't feel any of that. It's just, I'm going to come back again. But for adults, especially for women, how do we manage from a mindset perspective to not take the no personally?
I'm so glad you said that, because I think it can be so easy to think, oh, I asked for a raise. My manager said no, I'm not worth a raise. My manager doesn't think I'm worth a raise. And that we're crying, it feels hard. And I've had that. Mm-hmm. But really what we should be thinking is, wow, this company is really tight with its money. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to have to work really hard to convince this company to make this investment. Mm-hmm. It's a business decision. It's a resource allocation decision. And even in better times, companies are really reluctant to spend money. So how am I going to convince this company to make this investment in me?
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that women can, and this is, I don't want to make a generalization. I'm just trying to understand if this happens. not every woman is going to take their no and start crying and this and that, right? But there's some women who will get so offended by it, right? Like, I can't believe that you don't see my value, because we've taken the no as some indication of perceived value. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Right. But whatever meaning I've given to that no then dictates what my next decision happens to be. And that next decision might be, I'm looking out externally and I'm going to go and take my skills and my talents and go elsewhere.
Which you should do anyway, by the way. It's always good to have irons in the fire, but yes.
So the question, I guess, is, while I always think put yourself out there so you can see what the competition will bring, because that can be arsenal, that could be leverage. You can come back with an offer from someplace else, and that helps to fuel that next pay raise conversation. But do you ever think it's taking the no personally do you ever think that impacts the decisions that women might make prematurely? That, like, this could be a great opportunity, it could be a great career path, could be the right company, but because I've taken this no and created a meaning to it, now I've exited, and I may have exited prematurely without being willing to play this out and go another couple of rounds, if that question makes sense.
Yeah. Well, one really important thing is, I think there's a follow-up. When you hear no, and like 90%, you will probably hear no the first time, right? When you hear no, the follow-up question is, why not? Yeah. Or better still, not just why not, but okay, I understand that right now. What do you think you need to see from me? What could you help me? Could we work together on a plan for me to get a raise? In about how long? You think it could be about 3 months? What would you need to see over the course of these 3 months? So that you understand, is this like a never, not ever? Or is this, you're just not convinced? Or is this, is this just not the right time? Or is there more I have to do, and what is it? And be very specific. But I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories to tell, if that's okay. And it's not actually about a raise. It's about a promotion, and it's about how I got into sales. Okay. And it goes like this. So as I mentioned, I was in like a strategy finance role, and I was adjacent to this big new product launch at the Wall Street Journal. They were launching the weekend newspaper, and I really wanted to be, they were hiring somebody to be the person that ran it. And I wanted that job so badly. And so I went to the person who was making the decision about who got to have that job. And I said, I've been working so hard on this project. I really want this. I know it's a stretch role for me, but I really want to see if you would give me this job. And she said, no, you don't have any experience in sales. And I think it was actually not characteristic of me, but I was not dissuaded. I just knew that I could do this job so well. So I went back and wrote a 30, 60, 90-day plan. And I brought it to her and I said, I know you said no, but here's my 30, 60-day, 90-day plan. Here's what I would do if you gave me this job. And she looked at it and she said, wow, this is incredible. You did great work on this, but you don't have sales experience, so I can't give you this job. And then it took them a while to fill the job. And I just started kind of like stepping in and doing it. And finally, I went back to her a third time. And I said, I've done this and this and this. I'm on the way. Will you give me this job? And she finally said, yes. No, it's very clear to me no one would want this job as much as you would. So I will give you this job.
Interesting.
And what's amazing is that was the promotion that changed my life, changed my career completely.
Wow. So how did you not take the no personally? Like, why was it that you did not? Because you didn't have sales experience.
Didn't have the experience.
So it wasn't like what she said was invalid. It was true. And for many folks, they look at the qualification. You're right. I don't have that qualification. That's a big part of the job. But that didn't stop you. So why were you not deterred, A, by the no, and B, by the fact that the no was actually valid?
I had so much conviction I could have success. I just knew it. And by the way, when she gave me the job, I went and threw up.
Oh my God, I gotta do the job. Isn't that how it goes?
Yeah, I just had conviction. And And that's the thing. It's really hard to have those moments of such clear confidence. And I have not had that most of my career. I've bombed so many interviews. I mean, like there's a pile of rejection letters somewhere with my name on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that was the job for me, and I knew I deserved it. But we should all know we deserve it and have that clarity. And if you don't feel with that conviction that you deserve a raise, you need to spend some time reminding yourself and arming yourself with that evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Because you should have that inside and out, so that nobody should be asking for a raise just to ask.
Yeah.
You should know and understand and believe with like objective evidence that you're due.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why. And if you have that, it should be a pretty straightforward conversation, even if it starts with no.
Yeah. There's a couple things that really land with me from that story. The first is this idea of certainty. And I'm a firm believer that in any conversation, whether it's in an intimate conversation with your spouse, if it's, with somebody on your team, or making the sale, the person with the most certainty wins. And you could be certainly wrong, but the person with the most certainty wins. And so for a lot of us going into these kinds of conversations, when you are not certain about what you deserve, you're not certain about your ability to do the job. So for you with this role, you had so much conviction about your ability to do it. Independent of the fact that there were gaps in the skill set, you were like, oh, I could learn that, or I could figure that out, or I could make it happen. And so for many of us, many folks listening on the call, if that certainty is not there, that's where you got to start. Because if you're not certain, you are going to give up on the first no, or you are going to, turn tail and run. That's critical. And that certainty will win over a lot of skeptics.
Exactly.
Do you want to jump in on that?
No, that you have to have it. It has to be an ironclad case in your own head and the one that you're communicating.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the second piece of it, I think, deals with kind of the whole redesigning of your success bit and perfect work. Because for Romy, it was this, I can do this. Like, I want this. There's that energy. And when you're not at that place, whether it's in a career or a business, it's hard to muster the fire in the belly that's required to enroll people in your vision, right? And so that's why it's important to be aligned to your perfect work, because when you are, forget about it. Like, it's such a natural expression of who you are, because you're so rightly aligned. And so that piece becomes really, really critical as well. As we start to land the plane a little bit, how often should women be asking for raises? Because sometimes, like, there are folks who tend to ask when somehow they feel they've been jilted, or they hear what someone else is making, and now it's like, I've got to, make a case so that I'm on parity. But just from a kind of the whole idea of career development and career management, like, is this just a regular tune-up that people should be having? Especially, let's assuming you're performing and you're delivering. Let's make that basic assumption. But is that a regular part of managing your career, that you should be having these conversations if you're not getting promoted on a regular basis?
Absolutely. I think everyone should be working on a career roadmap with their manager.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on how far away you are from the last promotion or raise, you should be looking ahead to what's the next one? What am I going to achieve over the next 12 months? What's my personal development plan? So maybe I just got a raise. Thank you so much. Let's talk about what my next 12 months look like. What are the things that you're going to want to be seeing from me? Mm-hmm. Because the other thing is, I think, especially right now, workforces are so lean, things can get so busy that those expectation or development conversations go by the wayside. Mm-hmm. And then you fall out of tune with your manager. Mm-hmm. So it's incumbent on you to bring it up. Make sure that you are doing everything you need to achieve what your manager needs and expects from you. Mm-hmm. And then kind of, what are the checkpoints? What is the next in 12 months? If you want to be able to say, look, you said you expect X, Y, and Z from me. I've delivered X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about what it would look like for me to get my next raise. What do you need to see from me? What would you need in order to go to bat for me?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So as we kind of circle back on some of the key points that she talked about, I think most important when it comes to raise, recognizing that it's not just about you, and you've got to enroll another human being into the vision of what it is that you're looking to do and helping them to understand what's in it for them. So step one is, have a really good grasp of your company's budget cycle, their financial performance, all of those kinds of things. Really be armed with some of that information to build their solid business case of what you have achieved, and more importantly, what you can achieve moving forward, and what's that vision and what's that strategy there. 3, understand what your manager cares about, like what are his or her values, because she's the one that has to advocate for you. So what's in it for them? Why are they going to stick their neck out there? Why are they going to risk some of their relationship currency on the decision to enroll other people on the decision to invest in you? And I remember, it's funny because I remember when I was in the corporate space, and we had a new general manager that came into the company from the outside. And so he came in to kind of shake things up and all of that. And there were 2 of us on a certain team that worked with really high level accounts for that company. And when he came in, he was trying to figure out, how do I keep top talent? How do I make changes? How do I make shifts? Whatever. And one of the first things he did was he gave me a $20,000 raise. And there were 2 of us, and 2 of us didn't get a $20,000 raise. And it was really interesting because as he comes in, he's interviewing under the guise of just trying to get the lay of the land and all of that, get to know folks. And in those conversations, you start to share what your vision is, where you think the company can go, how, we can help him, and, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, what I didn't realize at the time is what a big decision that is. Someone coming in with no reputation, he didn't have a reputation in the company, he had a reputation outside of the company. But if he made a bet on me and I didn't pan out, that was going to be big egg on his face, right? And so really, this pay conversation, this pay raise conversation, it's so important that you recognize that it's not just about you. And it's so important to set your managers up to be able to win with you should they decide to invest those dollars in you. I think that is really, really critical.
Yes. And Renessa, there's something else too that I like in what you just said, which is companies want to retain great employees. People who are doing great work and who are adding and contributing and who are team players, companies want to retain them. So to the certainty point, you've got that on your side. Don't forget that. If you feel confident you've done great work and that you're a team player, you should be in the right position to be asking for the raise.
Yeah, yeah. When do you know when it's time to go? Like, how do you know when this is not an issue of budgets and cycles and all of that? It's an issue of value. And no matter what I give or what I do, there's not going to be enough perceived value to warrant me getting what I think I, deserve. So how do you kind of weigh the calculus to then decide it's time to go?
I think that's a harder one. That is very hard. It is very gray. Mm-hmm. And it's never perfect. I actually think that our kind of tendency as human beings is to stay, when really most of the time going will never disappoint us. There's I once heard about a study of, there are people called regretologists. These are people who study regrets. And they've determined over and over again that we much more regret the things we didn't do than the things we did.
Wow.
So you are more likely to regret staying than going.
No, I think that's an interesting point. When it comes to how we assess risk, I think a lot of us put a lot more weight on this idea that we might regret making the decision.
Yeah, and
than not.
stability and
Yeah.
consistency.
No, I think that's great. But the last point that she mentioned, I was giving you guys the steps before I totally digressed. The last point that she mentioned was, and I thought this was the most brilliant point at all, is expecting the no. Like,
Yeah.
you go
Yeah,
in,
go in expecting to hear
it.
no.
It takes the shock right out of that, right? But also then expecting that you're in a 9-inning game, and that if you don't get it the first time, join the freaking crowd. If you don't get it the second time, okay.
The goal of the raise conversation is not to get a raise. The goal of the conversation is to set the stage for the next conversation and the next conversation until you get the raise.
And I think if just understanding that shift of perspective, expectation, and framework, I think is golden. I appreciate that. So as we prepare to close out, share a little bit more about Fairygodboss, because I think the world of what you and Georgine are doing in the marketplace, but I'd love for folks to hear from you what they can experience, what they can have access to, and then we'll talk about how they can get online and sign up and take advantage of it.
Yes, thank you for asking. So the whole premise of Fairygodboss is that women have a lot of questions about career, some of which we've talked about here today, that are hard to ask. And we don't necessarily even want to ask with our identity tied to them, right? Things like, I'm having a hard time convincing my manager to give me a raise, or things like, I'm having a hard time finding my voice in a meeting, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So at Fairygodboss, you can participate in our community with anonymity. You can create a profile on our platform and then ask and answer questions anonymously. And I think that's really important. We have this robust community of very smart women who are there to help each other, but can do so with the protection of not having to share their identity. And I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. We have an amazing editorial team. We publish original career advice several times a day. Mm-hmm. And we have free anonymous job reviews for women by women. So you can go and find out what women are saying working at various companies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's awesome, y'all. It's just awesome.
Nice. So thank you.
So below this video, you will see a link to the Fairygodboss site. Go as quickly as you can, put your name and your email in, and just stay connected. And it doesn't matter where you are on the career spectrum. You may not be at a place where you're looking to pivot or anything like that, but there's just so much great information that's going to support you at every stage of the game. And when you need it most, there's something in there that can support you or answer a question that you have. And so I highly recommend the quality of the content, the quality of the discussions, the quality of the feedback, and the insights and that folks give. I think I recommend it a lot, which is why I wanted to present it to you. So definitely, subscribe, follow them. And all that said, I mean, I'll say this on behalf of Romy and myself. We wish you every success and happiness, and we wish you the money. So go ask for the money, and all that other good stuff. So we will see you next time. And with that, bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome.